we need to embrace the fact that people are constantly changing and might not be in environments that allow them to reach their full potential. And so I think that this puts the emphasis more on how can we as educators and teachers create contexts that bring kids to the top of their potential so that they can be the best version of themselves.
As vozes do professor.
أصوات المعلمون.
老師有話兒.
Teachers' voices.
Welcome to a new episode of Teachers' Voices. I'm your host, Nina Alonso, and today we are talking about learning variability. What is learning variability? Why does talking about learning variability help young people thrive? And how can we better adapt to children's variability? Today, my dog Indy and I have just finished a road trip. So we drove from Cadiz in the very south of Spain, and after hours driving in a dust cloud, we have arrived in a mountainous area not far from Madrid. We are here for a family reunion, and for the hundreds of kilometers from south to north, the dust to cloud became less dense, but it was there the whole time. The air was not clear, and my eyes were kind of itchy, and when I stepped out of my white car, I saw that it was covered in an orangey dusty layer. I even saw some of the orange dust in this black fort too. So what was that? Well, it was particles from the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert might seem far from Europe, but in the same way that wind helps birds migrate for long distances, it can also bring hot air and sand. This again reminds me that everything in nature is interconnected, and because we are humans and humans are nature and part of that interconnectedness, anytime that we discuss the development of human beings, it is interesting to bring different perspectives. And when discussing children's learning and development, it is important to see how teaching and learning happens in different contexts. And our guest today will help us with that. Today, we will hear from Guyot Betoto, a highly engaged teacher from Madagascar who, despite teaching large groups of students in a traditional learning environment, is always looking for ways to adapt to his students' learning needs. Then we will hear from edupreneurs and learning guides Emma Bacco and Devin Carberry talking about a radical transformative learning model called Learn Life, based in Barcelona. But first, to clarify some key concepts, we start our journey at the University of Yale in the United States, where we visit Julia Leonard, assistant professor at the Department of Psychology. Hello, Julia. Thanks so much for accepting my invitation.
I'm so excited to be here and talk to you. I'm in my office at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. It's a sunny day.
Julia, what is learning variability?
We can think about learning variability in two ways. There's how I'm different than you, right? So my learning might be different than your learning. What motivates me to learn might be different than what motivates you to learn. But also we can think about within learner variability. So how every single day I wake up kind of in a different mood, kind of in a different interest zone, and my learning one day might be different from the other day. But then we can zoom in even more and say my learning in one class might be different than another class, or my learning before lunch might be different than my learning after lunch, or depending on who I talk to. So if there's anything we know about humans, it's that we're incredibly sensitive to our environment and our context. And so that means that we are actually changing all the time. And how we learn is changing a little bit more than I think we've previously appreciated.
In this podcast, we often discuss the conditions that surround teaching and learning. The learning contexts around children are not static. They change all the time and affect learners and the whole learning ecosystem.
I've just been having a lot of interesting conversations with preschool directors who have talked about the struggle of kids adjusting to the more school environment versus home, because they've been talking to a lot of teachers and parents and realizing, a lot of these kids have a very different context at home. And when they get to school, especially kids who are entering more like schooling environments for the first time, they have to learn a new set of rules and they have to learn how to learn, right? Even children themselves are constantly adapting to different environments and figuring out how to behave in these different environments, which affects their learning.
Later in this episode, we'll hear about educators talking about learning how to learn, which I'm also keen to cover in future episodes of Teachers' Voices. When learners consciously learn about their own learning processes, they might notice that when they are calm, they learn better one way, or when they feel restless, they learn better another way. Julia, why should we understand learning variability in schools more?
Yeah, I think it's important and needed for a few reasons. It can allow us to have a broader definition of intelligence and potential. We have so many high-stake tests that we think, this captures how smart this kid is or whether they can get into school, this school or that school. But that's just a snapshot in time. We need to embrace the fact that people are constantly changing and might not be in environments that allow them to reach their full potential. And so I think that this puts the emphasis more on how can we as educators and teachers create contexts that bring kids to the top of their potential so that they can be the best version of themselves.
What kinds of experiments do you run to gather evidence about learning variability?
Sometimes I joke that as a scientist, I'm actually not learning anything that teachers don't know sometimes. I'm just kind of proving with carefully controlled experiments the intuition that wise teachers have had for a while. But I think that one thing I've realized in my own data, I did a study where I was looking at motivational variability in 3-year-olds as they were learning to brush their teeth every night. So I followed them for 2 weeks, and some nights they brushed longer than others. They're still learning this key skill. And we wanted to know, why does the same kid brush longer some nights than other nights? Is it because, they didn't sleep well the night before? Is it because they were in a bad mood or their parent was stressed or their parent talked a lot to them? And we found a lot of variability. So some kids are sensitive to sleep and some kids are not sensitive to sleep. But most kids are very sensitive to what their parent says in the moment. So the more that their parent praises them, the longer they brush. The lesson learned from this is that we can all do experiments on ourselves all the time if we pay close attention, right? We can focus on learning variability, but we also know that there's basic things that all kids need, right? If you're not in a good mood, and I study mostly preschoolers, so, if they are very tired and they are about to have a breakdown, they're not going to be able to learn. So I think that there's some things that we can say, on average, what kids need every day? Like a good night's sleep, healthy diet. They need to probably be in a decent mood. And then there's some individual differences in their sensitivity to each of those factors. So some kids might be more okay if they don't sleep well than others. And that's what I think is really interesting, to look at that kind of sensitivity.
How can teachers support learning variability in the classroom?
It's really hard to be a teacher with a classroom of students who are all at different levels and who all are different sensitivities to their context and also in what they are most motivated by. And so I think the challenge of being an educator is figuring out what works for most kids and what works for each individual kid. And that requires really getting to know the children that you're with. The hard thing about being a teacher is that you have to pay close attention to maybe 30 or I guess in some cases 100 kids. And that can be really challenging. But I think that we can try to understand why some kids do better on some days than other days and try to just pay that little extra attention and have some curiosity about this in the classroom when we are observing the children that we're working with.
Before we leave Julia to visit Guyot and the Dupreneurs from Learn Life, I want to hear how Julia thinks education systems could make schools more open to learning strategies that can adapt to the needs of all learners.
There's two different sides to your question. I think this is where educational technology has really been helpful in some situations because you can give adaptive learning platforms to a large classroom and every kid can play at their own level. That individualizes the learning really well. I will say that that's one piece of a larger puzzle. I think that learning happens best when it's social. We're social beings, and I think that we can't just solely rely on technology. So I would really push back and say that's just a Band-Aid, and we really need to elevate the teaching profession, respect it. We need to have people who want to be teachers, who realize this is such an amazing job. And at least in capitalist societies, that might mean that we need to pay them more. In order to get to that point where you can put your love into these students and you're dealing with a challenging job where there's constantly obstacles every day, you yourself as a teacher need to be supported. Actually, it's kind of meta the same way the kids do. So you need to be having a good night's sleep. You need to have security. You need to not be worried that you're not going to have your basic needs met so that you can be also your best self and have the bandwidth to really be present with the kids at school.
I really enjoyed talking to Julia. She seems very connected to teachers in her research. We will hear more insights from Julia at the end of the episode. Now let's travel to Madagascar to visit Guyot. Guyot teaches secondary school students in a public school in Antalaha in the north of Madagascar. Guyot is also an active member of our Teachers' Voices WhatsApp group and community. After exchanging some WhatsApp messages about Julia's definition of learning variability, Guyot asked to meet me on a Saturday morning, and while I am eating my breakfast, he is preparing for community celebrations. Hello, Guyot.
Hello, Nina. I have many people around. I have my kids, my family, of course, and then it is as it is a weekend. We, the Malagasy people, in our tradition, we celebrate the New Year within associations. So, because I am from Maranzeta, a 2 days walk from Antala, where I am working. We have an association of the native people from Maronzeta here in Antala, and I am actually the president of the association. So today is the day when we is able to share the moment and to say Happy New Year within our association. So even in May or April, until they celebrate it, they have to organize something so that the association will have more members continuing to be active, because the association is created to settle kind of mutual supports.
Guyot, you manage large groups of students but still find ways to adapt to your learners. How do you do that?
Okay, to deal with large classrooms with kids of different personalities and nature of learning things, first of all, what I do is to try to identify the kids having the same personalities. It is very important for the teacher to identify who are speakers. And then there are some of them, they need to touch something. They need to see like real examples when you teach vocabularies and stuff. Sometimes they need to act it out like in front of the class or something. So once you come to identify those types of kids, it is already a big step ahead in the attainment of your objective of teaching. But then once it comes to the activities that I introduce, so as not to distract the kids, is a group works. Because you to go around in a classroom of 94 kids or 99 or 77.
What do your teaching sessions look like? What would we see if we entered your classroom?
To start a lesson, I have a kind of icebreakers, making them repeat what we learned last time so that we try to remember all of the important points before tackling a new topic of the day. But then what I do is I ask them to brainstorm what they know already about it. And then even sometimes I ask them to suggest a title to the lesson afterwards. I ask them to give all of that they know and they think they know. And then I have something that I prepare from home and that I will just put on the blackboard so that they will copy later on. But before that, I ask them what they know already. And then we kind of put them all together at the end. And then there the kids will feel confident that because it is partially from them, they have kind of pride in learning the lesson because it is not just a lecture. We, the teachers, we are too much theoretical sometimes that we escape the important points. But once you give them the chance to lead the others, they make all of the efforts and it is more efficient. So it is helping the teacher and helping the other young learners because they are in it. It is in their age. So it is much easier for them. It is like natural for the young people to do things at their age. They find the most practical ways of telling things and showing things.
How else do you adapt to how your students learn?
Sometimes I exchange places. For example, I give an activity in which people move to the other group, which needs some inspiration. Because in a large classroom, it is very difficult to do the things only on your own. You need like facilitators, and those good kids, they do it with pleasure. And while motivating the others, they take more because they make effort to lead the team.
Julia explained how important it is for teachers to know their students and notice their feelings and when things change. Are you able to do that with such large group of students?
Yes, always, because you see, you as a teacher, you stand up, you walk around, you never stay at one corner or only up front, but you move around to check what they write and what they do. Sometimes you find kids not copying anything. Sometimes they are distracted. Sometimes they are going through difficult situations within their families and stuff. So during the break time, I try to talk to that kid. But it is very easy for a teacher to identify those things because you are front and they all sit there. Is sometimes the kid having the problem will not look at you or will not copy the lesson, or there are many different ways of identifying and of pinpointing those kids.
Let's leave Guyot and Madagascar to travel to the south of Europe. I have wanted to know about a student-centered innovative educational approach called LearnLife for some time now. LearnLife is a groundbreaking project that has operated in learning hubs in the area of Barcelona since 2017. Its goal is to transform conventional education so that learners' interests and passions are at the center. Now I'm delighted to be in a call with Emma Buckle, LearnLife's Community Partnership and Development Director. Hello, Emma.
Hi, Nina. Thanks for inviting us to join. I'm actually in my home in Casta de Fez right now. I have the luck of being able to also be flexible with location. And sometimes I'm at Eco Hub for Learn Life, which is one of our spaces, sometimes at Urban Hub for Learn Life, and sometimes in other locations, schools, partners, and if not, working from home. So right now you can see a guitar behind me. I play piano, but my partner plays guitar and my son's learning.
Emma, how did Learn Life start?
So seeing that there was this need for the world of learning to kind of catch up to the way the world around us is changing so quickly and really help, rather than take an industrial model, take a very truly personal model that helps learners focus on and find their own personal passion. So at the heart of the approach for Learn Life is learner well-being, learner autonomy, and passion-based learning, where they can find their own path and develop skills and competencies for themselves, with intrinsic motivation to want to kind of grow and learn and thrive and be the best version of themselves that they can be.
Emma, I have seen that instead of schools, LearnLife has learning spaces and learning hubs, and that there are learning guides instead of teachers because they focus on learning how to learn and in developing the learner's autonomy. Tell me about these learning spaces.
We currently have 2 hubs, the Urban Hub in the center of Barcelona in a very urban context on a lovely pedestrian street right in the center. And then Eco Hub, which has been open since 2021. We're actually in our 4th year of the primary years program, but the hub itself for Eco Hub opened in 2021. And as the name would suggest, is a sustainable passive house structure, energy efficient. We're right out just on the beach front, actually, in Casta de Fez. When you walk into the hubs, both Urban Hub and Eco Hub, neither one look like a traditional classroom. Teacher at the front, all knowledge, omniscient, giving instruction to children sitting in desks facing the teacher. What you would more often see in our hubs is a hive of activity, learners working on different projects in a same space, either in groups or individually. And it might be that they're working towards the same theme, but each one will probably be doing something slightly different. And we also have our studio environments where learners get to interact, develop, tinker, make, iterate, prototype in, professional level, really, studios where we have materials and equipment that is of a professional level, and we've worked with many partners to source this. We have our carpentry studio with, CNC machines and digital carpentry. We have, as well as manual tools, we have electronics and 3D printing, we have multimedia, cooking studio, music studio with, state-of-the-art kind of recording equipment and things. So the learners get to actually, let's say, put into practice the real world skills that they're learning in real world environments. That's, I would say, the biggest difference from, say, a more traditional context is we're not focused on subject-based learning, but rather building skills and competencies ready for real-world context and real-world skill building.
It sounds like quite an unconventional learning setting. How do these conditions and the Learn Life education model adapt to the learning variability?
So how does that help? A lot of our learners then find that they want to develop their own projects. And there's a very entrepreneurial vibe about what they're doing because they're actually creating and tinkering and learning by doing, learning through experimenting, learning to fail or get things wrong and try again and iterate. For the younger learners, we don't have a studio-based environment, although we use the outdoor areas as sort of our nature-based studios. So they do go into the outdoor spaces and about, the connection with sort of nature and culture or different environments. They do get to also develop these real-world skills in real-life context, right? So it could be that you're learning about mathematics, not through theory of subject-based maths, but also doing a market and an exchange and learning about currency and how you put into practice addition and subtraction.
As Julia said at the beginning of the episode, exams give just a snapshot of the student's learning at a particular moment in time. Do you assess children differently in the Learn Life learning model?
That's a really important aspect for us, is to make sure that the learning program and the learner's own personal learning plan is reviewed frequently together with them and is adapted so that they feel like they are on track in terms of the areas that they want to explore and grow in. As far as how the learning can adapt to that learner, first of all, we want to help them have that autonomy and kind of agency over what is my learning? What do I want to learn, right? So what's my kind of plan going forward? Where are the areas I want to grow? In terms of just within the learning program, learners having a sense of autonomy, voice and choice, that's embedded into our actual learning, right? The building blocks that we have, which are essentially, they are learning experiences and I would say our alternative to subjects. Those building blocks allow space for learners to flex and have choice within that. Sometimes that's adapted, obviously, at given ages, it's maybe more structured and guided, but as they grow and get older, we want them to be able to develop into becoming lifelong learners and being able to have greater and greater autonomy with each step that they're learning on. So our learning guides have developed what we call these stages of autonomy, right? And this program that helps them understand within their learning, how autonomous am I and how am I growing and where am I on my level stage of autonomy to know where I'm really excelling and where there are areas where I still need to grow and develop into being more autonomous as a learner. They regularly check in with the learner on that. And then we also have at the end of each cycle, so a cycle is a trimester, at the end of each trimester, the learners are presenting back their learning from the previous 3 months. And we call those 360s. In those 360 reviews, the learners have to reflect on, what have I learned? Where have I grown? Where do I want to take my learning further? Where do I want to stretch myself further? Where are the areas where I feel I could do more? And what are the skills I want to develop? What are the projects I want to explore? And what are my passions? And so that reflection every 3 months is very profound.
This model seems very interesting as it adapts to individual interests. Seeing as you mentioned expensive facilities like recording studios and carpentry workshops, what could teachers around the world in more conventional and lower resource settings learn from this?
How can we make changes in the school or in the space to adapt it to being more passion-based? There are ways to embed kind of some of the principles of passion-based learning into that context and finding ways to help the learners focus on their particular passions, work on project-based initiatives together, and actually help them be the ones that drive forward. I wouldn't want any teacher or educator listening to this to feel daunted and think, oh, but we don't have studios and no, we can't do it. Educators as a profession, it's probably the most important profession in the world. They are the ones who are helping the next generation of young people to grow into this world, right?
Curious about this disruptive model, I asked Emma to introduce me to one of the Learn Life's learning guides. Devin Carberry leads Learn Life's Barcelona hub and is the head of learning programs. He answers me from Masailand in Kenya, where he's participating in a Maasai culture workshop with colleagues from Prescott College. I often ask African teachers in our teachers community how innovations shared by teachers from other contexts can be adapted to the realities of some overcrowded schools in the so-called Global South. So I asked Devin how learning guides from the Learn Life model could be applied in learning settings that have fewer resources than the Learn Life learning hubs.
I'm Devin Carberry. I'm the Director of Innovation and Learning for Learn Life in Barcelona, and I'm super excited to be visiting Masai Land in Kenya. And I'm really excited to be reunited with the professor who led that course, Mary Poole, and then also here with Xavier Yando, who is a student on the course. Culture is the most powerful vehicle for change in any school. And so developing a culture of kids who really want to learn is your greatest tool. I think one of the biggest challenges is the curriculum itself doesn't emphasize autonomous learning skills. And so it always feels like it's an extra to teach this, right? To grow skills of this kind. Whereas I feel like this is what we start with at Learn Life, is how do we help them be self-directed, self-determined, self-regulating, all these things. I'll give a quick shameless plug for my book that comes out next month, The Future Will Not Be Taught. But I talk about this in long detail, and the book is free online. So anybody in any country can access it.
Thanks, Devin. What is the role of the learning guide in Learn Life? If we went to a learning hub, what would a learning guide be doing?
So our learning guides are trained in what we call learning to learn conversations. A learning to learn conversation focuses on how someone is learning and how can they improve at learning. So it takes the emphasis off of the content. So let's say they're studying indigenous culture in Masai Land. We focus more on how are they learning about it? Is that effective, how they're learning about it? How could they apply their learning? Where are they getting resources for that learning? Are those quality resources? These kind of things. And so there's a lot of coaching that happens. So we offer whole group sessions on key skills, as well as a lot of on-the-shoulder coaching around how to do that. So you would see a lot of learners working on projects, guiding their own learning, getting on-the-shoulder coaching from both their peers, from learning guides. But behind the scenes, one of the most important things is building the skills so that they can be autonomous learners. And that's no easy process. From when they're really young in primary all the way through to when they're graduating, we're developing, and this is a big part of our curriculum, is autonomous learning skills. We don't have classes per se. We offer a program called Open Path Learning, in which the learners, in parallel to the guided courses that we offer, learners can come into Open Path and they have access to a variety of resources, as well as to some of our learning guides. And they can learn whatever they want, however they want. And so a learner can choose one day that they want to read a book for a couple of hours, followed by working on a fashion project, followed by leading a discussion on whatever the issue of the day is. And amazing projects come out of this because we give learners a space to reconnect with learning how they like to do it.
Learners in Learn Life work on projects that develop entrepreneurial mindsets, which was a focus of our last 2 episodes. Let's hear an example from Devin.
We had 2 learners who were really great friends, and knew they wanted to work on a project. And so they wanted to figure out how do they connect their interest in hospitality and artificial intelligence. And so they started building out what they would hope would go onto Airbnb, a chatbot that could respond to most of a host's queries. And so they started building that. And they essentially taught themselves how to code this chatbot, how to build it on the site. And these were things that they just kind of took and ran with and were really excited and worked really hard on. And what was really amazing was that by coincidence, our CEO, Christopher Pomeraning, met the CEO of Airbnb, and he didn't tell the kids this, but he brought the CEO of Airbnb into Learn Life and asked the learners to pitch their project to him, not knowing he's the CEO of Airbnb. And so the learners get their spiel in the way that they've been trained of, starting with what's the problem that most people are suffering, that Airbnb hosts are losing lots of time and responding to these queries, and this all could be automated. And then, of course, the great reveal where he's like, well, that's great. And also, I'm the CEO of Airbnb. And the kids turned ghost white and lost their minds a little bit about how excited they were to be able to talk to someone and get feedback.
Devin, Guyot teaches in Madagascar, where the teachers have large groups of students. Guyot is a creative teacher and adapts well to his students within the constraints of his context. He told me about the scarcity of professional development for teachers and the lack of teachers' qualification in his context. We can all learn from Guyot's efforts to adapt to his students, but what would you share with him that can be adaptable to his context?
The real Trojan horse in education is co-creation. And in any context, you can co-create with learners, right? You can decide, hey, we have this design challenge. I am one teacher, you are 70. How do we do this? Right? How can we make sure that you get what you need and allow the learners to come up with solutions? Of course, it helps if you understand design thinking as a methodology, makes it a lot easier. And there's plenty of resources about that online. I would take the learners through a design process and saying, hey, this is a clear challenge. I would see who are your natural leaders within the class, who the kids love to talk with and who love to learn from, right? If you can train learners, and I think 1 to 70 is actually not an impossible scale when learners have learning to learn skills, right? When they're autonomous and they have materials that they can follow. I would first try to figure out, like, how do we get the learners doing peer-to-peer coaching and understanding? How do you create an inquiry question for yourself? How do you access resources and creating resources that are self-guiding?
Emma shared some thoughts with me about interconnectedness. Educators can adapt to learners' changing needs by being open to what other educators are doing.
There is so much we can learn from other contexts and have the humility to not think that there's this sort of Eurocentric vision of this is how we do things here. Learning from each other, I think, is also one of the richest things that we can offer and do as educators, is offer spaces and a community where educators can also share their challenges and share know-how and exchange, tips and ideas and experiences.
Emma's observations brings us to the end of this episode. I would like to reflect on what, for me, are the highlights of what Julia, Guyot, Emma, and David have shared with us today. So we reflected on the fact that education systems and schools could do a better job in acknowledging that both learners and learning environments are constantly changing and that learners might not always be surrounded by the conditions that allow them to reach their full potential. We have seen that there is a lot schools can do to adapt to the fact that our capacity to learn is not always uniform or linear. As we have heard, teachers can be open and attentive to the changing states of their learners. Learning how to learn also helps children understand how their learning needs might change and what works best for them. The role of teachers is key on this because they can help students develop their own agency and autonomy. All this can contribute to making learning ecosystems more inclusive to all learners. Julia and I also talked about acknowledging that different children learn differently.
We need different people to come together to solve really challenging problems. So I think we can embrace those individual differences a bit more as well. And if we want to help kids, reach their potential, we need to appreciate those differences and figure out how to work with them. And then also, I think, celebrate different people's strengths. So acknowledge that different people have different strengths and we need diversity in the world.
What teachers do in the classroom needs to be documented. Julia is a great advocate of the teachers and humble about her own role as a scientist, but researchers like Julia can gather really important information from teachers.
But I also think it has big implications for policy. So if we want to individualize learning, we probably need smaller class sizes. And this, if I talk to teachers, this is the top thing that they want. They want smaller class sizes because they know that individualization is key to learning, right? So the research is a little bit behind here. And I think that if we can create a compelling case for why individualization matters, maybe we can create structures that allow teachers to do this work more easily. I have a lot of respect for teachers in the sense that I don't think I'm actually telling them anything they don't know. I think that if you say, oh, kids differ from each other, and even the same kid differs day to day in what they're motivated by, I think most teachers know that. I think that they'll say, of course, you guys are so behind with your science, right? Like, in some sense, psychologists are not in the field doing the work, which is why we need to talk to teachers more, which is why, these podcasts are so cool. But I think that I learn so much from the teachers I talk to, and often they're informing me, I'm not informing them, but my voice as a scientist or with the Yale affiliation can go a bit farther.
Thanks for listening to Teachers' Voices. You can find out about our guests today in the show notes. We always like to hear from you, so please get in touch. What do you think about the issues we have discussed here? Are there experiences you would like to share? You can engage with us in conversations on social media and by joining our WhatsApp group. Please don't forget to follow us and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform.